Ladies and gentlemen, the world just witnessed a seismic shift, a moment that shook the very foundations of power and pride on the global stage. What unfolded was not just a diplomatic exchange, it was a masterclass in courage, conviction, and unapologetic strength. This was a moment where history bent toward a new reality, where old narratives were challenged and a rising giant stood tall, unshaken and undefeated. In an era where voices are often drowned by noise, one stood out with fierce clarity, demanding respect, rewriting rules, and declaring that the time of looking down is over. This wasn't just politics, this was the roar of a nation reclaiming its destiny. And to those who underestimated the power of resilience and vision, beware. Because this moment will echo through time, inspiring millions on both sides of the world. When you own your story and refuse to bow, the world is forced to listen. That's exactly what we witnessed on that global stage. A moment so bold, so unapologetically powerful, it sent shockwaves through the very architecture of diplomacy. This wasn't a show of force through threats. It wasn't a flex of muscle through military might. No, it was something far more profound, the undeniable strength of a nation and a people who have come into their own, who know exactly who they are, and who refuse to apologize for it. This was confidence. Not the kind borrowed from alliances or written into the pages of past empires, but the kind forged in the fire of struggle, self-reliance, and unshakable belief. For decades, international conversations followed a script where certain nations spoke and others nodded, where one side gave the lecture and the other took notes. But times have changed, and in that charged moment we saw a refusal to read from the old script. Instead, we saw someone standing on that stage and saying, "We will speak for ourselves now." Not with arrogance, but with a calm, composed, and calculated strength that stunned the room into silence. That's the kind of confidence that comes from legacy. From knowing you are part of a civilization that has given the world mathematics, philosophy, democracy, innovation, and now a new kind of leadership. The world wasn't ready for that energy, that raw, undeniable power. Because for too long, it's been easy to dismiss voices that didn't come with a Western accent or a NATO stamp. But what we saw wasn't just a speech. It was a mirror held up to the world, a challenge to everything that has been taken for granted. It was a message: we are not here to be managed. We are here to lead. And that declaration didn't come with raised fists or angry rhetoric. It came with data, with dignity, and with absolute clarity. It's a lesson many in the West are still struggling to learn. You cannot speak down to a nation that has risen by lifting itself up. You cannot patronize a people who have transformed adversity into ambition, and ambition into achievement. That stage became more than just a backdrop for diplomatic banter. It became a battleground for narrative dominance. And the message that thundered through was this: respect is not requested, it is required. That's what true confidence looks like. And this confidence isn't just symbolic, it's strategic. It's the kind that says, we'll work with you, not beneath you. We're here to collaborate, not capitulate. It challenges the very structure of how global partnerships have operated. No longer is aid a tool of influence. No longer is approval a currency of control. We are witnessing the arrival of a new standard, one where mutual respect is non-negotiable. That's what rattled the room. That's what sent a jolt through the usual power players, because the script didn't just get rewritten, it got torn up. This moment also sent a signal back home to every young Indian or American watching who has ever been told to know their place, to stay in line, to wait their turn. That era is over. Now is the time for bold voices, clear vision, and relentless drive. What was demonstrated on that stage wasn't just for the cameras. It was a torch being passed to the next generation, a call to rise, to lead, and to never again let your confidence be diluted to make others comfortable. And make no mistake, this isn't just about one country finding, it's about a shift in global gravity. It's about a world no longer dominated by a single narrative or a single perspective. It's about diversity in leadership, in thought, and in ambition. And that is what scares the old guard, because they know deep down that once a nation finds its voice, there's no turning back. So if you're watching this moment and wondering what it means for the future, here's your answer. It means the game has changed. It means that power no longer wears just one face. It means that confidence, when rooted in truth, heritage, and purpose, cannot be ignored, no matter how many centuries others have ruled the table. Because when you own your story, when you walk into the room with your head high and your spine straight, the world can either adjust or be left behind. That's not just power, that's destiny. And destiny just spoke loud and clear. For far too long, the world has operated under a story told by someone else, crafted in high towers, delivered in carefully chosen words, and enforced with quiet arrogance. These narratives painted a picture where some nations led and others followed, where some decided what was right, what was fair, what was acceptable, and the rest had to fall in line. But what happened at the Quad Summit shattered those illusions like glass under pressure. It wasn't just a statement, it was a revolution of tone, a thunderclap that said, "We will no longer live by the stories others write for us." This moment was more than diplomatic tension, it was history rising to confront its editors. And this time the pen didn't belong to the usual authors. This time someone stood tall and said, "Enough of being lectured about values by those who have ignored them when convenient. Enough of being told how to act, who to align with, what to prioritize, and what to tolerate." That moment marked the breaking of chains, chains not made of iron, but of assumptions, old habits, and patronizing expectations. This wasn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It was evolution. The evolution of a voice that has grown louder with every injustice ignored, every double standard imposed, and every backhanded compliment disguised as cooperation. It was a reminder that dignity is not something to be handed out at summits or earned through compliance. It is inherent, and it must be recognized. The performance of old powers, comfortable in their roles as global gatekeepers, was disrupted by the simple, powerful truth. We do not need your approval to stand tall. We never did. And standing tall does not mean turning hostile. It means being honest. It means demanding reciprocity, not permission. It means saying what needs to be said, even when it rattles the walls of polished conference rooms. What happened on that stage wasn't chaos, it was clarity. A rare moment of unfiltered truth, in a world that thrives on politeness over principle. Because for far too long, politeness has been a tool used to silence the inconvenient. But the time for silence is over. The time for managed diplomacy, scripted smiles, and tiptoeing around uncomfortable truths has passed. We are now in an era where emerging powers no longer wear the mask of gratitude, just to be invited into the room. Now they enter the room, and reshape it. They speak with the full weight of their civilizations behind them. They speak with the lived experience of colonization, of marginalization, and of fighting their way into relevance on a playing field that was never meant to be fair. And when they speak, they do not ask for a seat, they take it. This is not aggression, it's assertion, the kind of assertion that says, we have built our strength without exploitation. We have lifted millions from poverty, without invading a single nation. We have earned our place not through war, but through will. And now we will not let anyone else define who we are. This kind of strength terrifies those who relied on quiet obedience. It terrifies those who built influence on the assumption that the world would forever play by their rules. And here's the real disruption. This movement isn't just political, it's psychological, it's emotional, it's spiritual. It's a shift in mindset that says, we don't just reject the old narratives, we reject the need for them. We will no longer wait for validation from those who benefited from our silence. This is about legacy. This is about taking back the narrative, not through violence, not through vengeance, but through vision. Because stories shape the world. And when you control the story, you control the future. That's what's really happening here. It's a battle over the lens through which global politics is viewed. And for the first time in a long time, that lens is being cleaned, recalibrated, and refocused, not by those who wrote the past, but by those who are ready to write the future. This is a tectonic shift, a generational one, and it's only the beginning, because once the story breaks free, once the world hears a voice that speaks not with fear, but with pride, there's no going back. The old narratives may still be loud, but they're losing their grip. The ink is running dry, and the new story, it's already being written, with fire, with purpose, and with truth. It wasn't just a speech, it was a spark. A jolt of electricity that shot through the hearts of millions, awakening something that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Pride, not shallow pride, not the kind that waves a flag for the sake of performance, but deep, ancestral, earned pride. The kind that makes your chest rise When your nation is spoken about with reverence, not pity, the kind that makes you feel. Finally, someone said what we've all been feeling. That moment on the global stage didn't just send shockwaves abroad, it ignited a fire at home, and that fire is pride, finally awakened, finally unafraid. For years, global platforms have felt like stages where certain nations were expected to smile politely, nod along, and be grateful for the crumbs of recognition handed down by the so-called leaders of the world. But what happened at the Quad Summit flipped that dynamic completely. It was like watching a son stand up to a father who had talked down to him his whole life, calm, measured, but unshakable. That one moment told the world, we don't seek validation, we carry our own. This pride didn't come out of nowhere. It's been forged in silence, in the long hours of rebuilding a nation after colonization, in the sweat of engineers, the minds of scientists, the hopes of parents who sacrificed everything for their children's future. It's built on space missions launched against all odds, on vaccine diplomacy that saved lives across continents, on economic strides that the world once doubted. And now it stands center stage, not to gloat, but to claim. Pride isn't about boasting. It's about knowing what you bring to the table, and refusing to let anyone else dictate your worth. When that voice echoed through the summit, clear, composed, and utterly fearless, it wasn't just one man speaking, it was a billion people standing behind him. And for every Indian sitting in front of their screen, watching that moment unfold, there was a surge of emotion too deep to explain. Finally, someone said we deserve to be heard, not as beneficiaries of Western charity, but as equals with our own power, our own voice, our own path. For Americans watching, it was a moment to reflect, because true strength doesn't always come from domination. It comes from recognition. It comes from recognition. It comes from seeing in others what once made you rise, grit, belief, and the refusal to be underestimated. This was not a humiliation. It was a challenge to evolve, a challenge to remember that leadership is not a birthright, it's a responsibility. And if you're not willing to respect the strength of your partners, then you're not leading, you're dictating. And that era is ending. This pride is transformative. It's contagious. It inspires not just one nation, but all those who've ever been sidelined, talked over, or looked down upon. It says to the youth, you don't need to mimic someone else's version of success. You can define your own. It tells the next generation of diplomats, scientists, soldiers, and artists that they no longer need to wait to be seen. They are already visible, and what they see now is a reflection of power, earned, grounded, and unshaken. This was the kind of pride that doesn't fade after the headlines disappear. It lingers. It changes the way people walk, the way they speak, the way they dream. It elevates the standards. No longer will we celebrate just being included. We will only celebrate when we are respected. That's the new bar. That's the new baseline. And it came not from a declaration of war, but from a declaration of identity. It's not just about India rising. It's about a global shift, a realignment of who commands attention, who sets the pace, who tells the story. And in this new world, pride is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Because without it, nations are just shadows of their potential, but with it they become unstoppable. So when that voice broke through the usual noise of diplomacy, with fire in its calmness, what we witnessed wasn't defiance, it was arrival. It was history reintroducing itself, with a new face and a new tone. It was a nation standing in the storm, not flinching, not folding, but owning the moment. And in that moment, the pride of a nation, long buried under years of being spoken for, finally rose to speak for itself. The world is changing, but not everyone is ready for it. The old powers, the ones who've long sat comfortably at the head of the global table, are suddenly looking around and realizing they're no longer alone, that the same voices they used to silence are now speaking louder, clearer, and with more conviction than ever before. And what happened at the Quad Summit wasn't just a diplomatic difference, it was a full-on rebellion against complacency, not with weapons or threats, but with truth, presence, and power. A quiet defiance that roared louder than any speech before it. This wasn't just about standing up, it was about not sitting down anymore. For too long, nations have been expected to accept their place in the hierarchy of global affairs. They were told when to speak, how to behave, who to align with, and what to compromise in the name of diplomacy. But that system thrives on compliance, not courage. And what we saw in that moment was pure courage. It was a disruption of comfort, a challenge to those who believed they could continue leading the world without listening to it. This rebellion wasn't loud or chaotic. It was precise. It was calculated. And that's what made it even more powerful. It came from a nation that has played the long game, endured the dismissals, swallowed the insults, and kept building, patiently, relentlessly, quietly, until one day, silence turned into strength. And that strength stood up and said, "We're not here to be managed. We're here to be respected." And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because complacency is the enemy of progress. And too many global powers have grown lazy with their influence, assuming that history will keep them on top, simply because of what they once were. But the world doesn't care about yesterday's titles. It moves with those who have the vision and the guts to challenge the status quo. And that's exactly what this moment did. It was a wake-up call to every nation still clinging to outdated models of dominance. Evolve, or be left behind. This wasn't anti-West. This wasn't anti-America. It was anti-arrogance. It was anti-assumption. It was a line drawn in the sand that said, we will engage, but not obey. We will collaborate, but not be commanded. And the timing couldn't be more perfect, because today's world demands balance. It demands voices from every hemisphere, not just one. It demands honesty, not diplomacy for show. And that honesty arrived like a storm, calm on the outside, unstoppable underneath. The rebellion we witnessed was the rebellion of self-worth. It was the moment a rising power refused to be spoken for, and instead spoke to the powers that be, with unshakable clarity. And the ripple effect of that moment, it will be felt far beyond summits and headlines. It will move into classrooms, boardrooms, startup hubs, and parliaments. It will give courage to the quiet. It will give fire to the frustrated. And it will show the world that power is no longer about controlling the mic. It's about earning the right to speak into it. What happened wasn't just a political statement. It was a generational shift, a redefinition of what leadership looks like. It's no longer about who shouts the loudest or who spends the most. It's about who stands their ground, speaks with purpose, and demands dignity without flinching. That's the kind of leadership the world needs now. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't wait for permission to exist. And let's be clear, this rebellion is just getting started. Because once you've spoken your truth on the global stage, once you've broken free from the expectations of being agreeable and accommodating, there's no going back. You don't shrink again. You don't play small again. You walk taller. You think bigger. And you make it impossible for anyone to look away. So let this be a message to the world's gatekeepers. The rules are being rewritten, not with anger, but with assertion, not with destruction, but with direction. And if you're not ready for that shift, if you're still clinging to the illusion that respect is yours by default, prepare to be uncomfortable, because the age of silent submission is over. This is the rise of bold diplomacy. This is the birth of fearless dialogue. This is a rebellion, not of chaos, but of clarity. And once you've tasted that kind of truth, nothing else will do. What we witnessed was more than a viral moment, more than a diplomatic highlight. It was the kind of shift history rarely announces with fanfare, but the world never forgets. Because in those few minutes, a message was sent that no translation could dilute, no analysis could soften, and no spin could control. It was raw, it was real, and it was revolutionary. A rising power had looked the old world in the eye, not with hostility, not with bitterness, but with fearless conviction. It didn't ask to be seen. It made itself impossible to ignore. That's the truth of this new age. Influence is no longer inherited, it's earned. And respect doesn't flow from wealth or military strength alone. It flows from clarity, from courage, from consistency. In a world flooded with noise, the voice that cuts through is the one that speaks with authenticity. That's what we saw. That's what we felt. And whether you agreed with every word or not, you couldn't deny the power of that presence. There are moments in every nation's journey when the world finally sees them, not as a junior partner, not as a pupil, but as a peer. This was one of those moments. It wasn't declared in bombastic slogans or empty bravado, but in the quiet dominance of someone who knows exactly where they stand. That kind of self-possession is contagious. It awakens something. It redefines what's possible, not just for one country, but for others who've waited too long on the sidelines of international respect. This is how power shifts, not with explosions, but with evolution, not by tearing others down, but by standing so tall, they can no longer look over you. And that's what makes the moment so important. It wasn't a power grab. It wasn't about undermining anyone. It was about finally matching posture with reality, about a nation saying,
we've arrived, and we're not apologizing for it. To some, that message might feel threatening, but to those paying attention, it's not a threat, it's a promise that the world is finally growing up, that the old rules of domination and control are being replaced by mutual respect, real conversation, and shared ambition. And if that makes the old guard uncomfortable, then maybe they should ask why. Why does confidence in another nation feel like a challenge, unless deep down, you were never treating them as equals in the first place? The beauty of this moment is that it wasn't just about one country standing tall. It was about a global shift in how leadership looks, how diplomacy sounds, and how strength is defined. We are witnessing the emergence of a new model, one that doesn't need to shout to command attention, one that doesn't rely on hierarchy to prove its worth. It leads by example. It leads by standing still, while others stumble in their own assumptions. So let the world take note. Let every young leader, every rising voice, every underestimated nation hold on to this moment, because the days of playing small to keep others comfortable are over. The age of careful diplomacy that avoids truth for the sake of tradition is fading. What comes next will be bolder, louder, more honest, and yes, more uncomfortable. But from that discomfort, something extraordinary will grow. This is not the end of the old world, but it is the beginning of a new one. One where confidence isn't punished, where clarity isn't seen as defiance, and where strength wears a different face. A world where being unapologetically proud of who you are doesn't make you dangerous, it makes you essential. So to everyone watching, remember this moment, remember how it felt, because this isn't just news, this is a turning point, and once history shifts, it never turns back.